So, we move on to agenda item 4, the main agenda of this evening, which is the Thanet Local Plan, Publication Stage, Regulation 19 and Submission for Examination, Regulation 22. Members would have found notes on their chairs. Can I ask, do members need to have a few minutes to digest those notes before we move on to the main agenda item? So I think if sufficient people are interested, or shall we move on? In that case, we'll move on, and I call upon the leader.
Thank you, Chairman. I would remind members that the local plan is a statutory document that is assessed by an independent planning inspector and must be clearly evidence-based. The purpose of the local plan is to set out the development strategy for the district for the period to 2031, identifying sites to be objectively assessed housing, employment and other needs. The plan also identifies areas to be protected from development, such as international wildlife sites, green wedges and flood risk areas. The local plan provides a starting point for considering planning applications and helps to provide certainty about development for local people, developers and investors alike. I'd just like to remind members how we've got to where we are today. In January, the previous administration tabled a draft local plan which proposed a mixed-use allocation on the Manston Airport site. This was rejected by 35 councillors. I'd remind Council that some 48 councillors were elected, having promised to see aviation return to Manston if they possibly could. The draft local plan before you tonight, recommended by Cabinet, leaves the Manston site unallocated for at least 2 years following the adoption of a new local plan, acknowledging the current DCO process for the site and allowing for potential indemnity partners in a future CPO process to come forward. It must be stressed that current airport-related policies, including EC4, would remain in force until a new local plan is adopted and will continue to carry weight in planning decisions. It's important that there is no further delay to the local plan process. Members will be aware that the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government is already assessing the position of the draft local plan in Thanet with a view to further intervention if the draft local plan does not proceed in a timely fashion, effectively removing council control of the process. Delay also risks being caught by the proposed change in the formula used to assess housing need, leading to an increase in our housing target of over 3,000 extra homes. I would remind members that before us tonight is a draft local plan to be published for comment and then submitted for examination. Those who disagree with aspects of the plan should make comment, and I would encourage as many people as want to do that, because that will then give them the opportunity to make representation in person at the public inquiry. In the meantime, I urge members to support the recommendation and move the local plan process forward. Thank you, Chairman. Oh, sorry. I better move it, hasn't it? I've said it. So I move the recommendations as on the members' notes, which are proposals coming from Cabinet from parenthesis 1 through to parenthesis 6. I so move, Chair.
Thank you. Is there a seconder?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Savage. Councillor Groves.
Yes, Chairman. At the moment, we are looking at one option, which I believe originally we had 2 options, which was option 1 and option 2. Surely this council should be debating at least 2 options, and the option 1 that I read was the officer's recommendation, not this one. Thank you.
That's not the Cabinet's recommendation.
Yes.
Leader, would you like to respond?
Yeah, 2 options came before Cabinet, and after debate we actually got option 2.
Councillor Campbell.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully no brain fade this evening. Just to be sure there isn't, I've written it down.
I had the windows open for your benefit, Councillor Campbell.
Thank you.
I suffered exactly the same brain seizure last night.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. This afternoon and again this evening, Councillor Bayford sought to justify his Cabinet's adoption of the overview and scrutiny recommendations by stating that most councillors were elected on the promise that they would return Manston as a functioning airport, and they should honour that promise to their residents. Now, on the face of it, this is a very laudable statement. However, what it does not take into account is the consequence of that now known promise. This council now knows and has evidential reports that a functioning airport on that site is unsustainable. It has no countermanding evidence to the contrary and is not seeking any. Why? Because they know that that evidence does not exist. So if, or should I say when, this council supports this Cabinet recommendation, we will have a draft local plan with a large brownfield site in the middle of Thanet, unallocated for at least 2 years, with a consequence of over 2,500 homes being allocated on greenfield sites, which, because of their diverse locations, will not generate the necessary infrastructure investment, putting local services under enormous strain. Upon public examination, the inspector will have our draft local plan with a large brownfield site unallocated for at least 2 years, and our legally required brownfield site register, which allocates that very land for housing locally. By the way, this iteration of the local plan reduces the percentage of housing allocated on brownfield sites from 40%, option 1, down to 25%, something I am sure the inspector would take into account upon examination. Even though government instruction requires councils to include brownfield sites first. This council is already on a yellow card from the Department of Housing, Communities and Local Government for not producing a sound, evidence-based local plan. So what are the Cabinet proposing? Why, an unsound, non-evidence-based plan for adoption. What makes me think we are heading for a planning car crash? I absolve completely the senior management team and our planning team, for they have recommended a sound, evidence-based option which has been rejected by Cabinet. In conclusion, I will ask one question. And I've got 2 pages stuck together. If this council does adopt the Cabinet's proposal this evening, does that adoption in effect mean we are formally, as a council, rejecting planning application 18060, the onus of the site's application for mixed-use development?
Hope so.
Thank you.
Hope so.
Thank you, Councillor Campbell. Councillor Brim, I think, and then Councillor Messenger. The leader's not standing. He's not indicated he wants to respond to that at this moment. So, Councillor Brim.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, this evening I'd like to ask for recorded votes. This evening I'm speaking on behalf of my constituents solely regarding the local plan and the overdevelopment of the village of Birchington. Section 3.16 of the Council's published local plan document specifically refers to Birchington as a village, albeit a large one. However, in your separate paper titled Housing Levels for Rural Settlements, your paper states the following: that a responsive approach should be taken to local circumstances in rural areas regarding the reflection of local need, including thorough rural exception sites where needed. The paper also states about promoting sustainable development in rural areas that will enhance and maintain vitality of rural communities. The paper also states that a blanket expansion should be avoided unless supported by robust evidence. The village listings that are afforded this protection are as follows: Acol, Cliffs End, Minster, Monkton, St Nicholas, Manston and Sarr. However, you have left the village of Birchington off this list, and we are a rural area. By doing so, excessive housing could easily be foisted upon Birchington, which will result in us becoming a town. I have not campaigned against the overdevelopment of Birchington and Thanet in my role as a member of the public, TDC elected member, TDC Cabinet member and Vice Chairman of Campaign to Protect Rural England Thanet branch for the last 3.5 years to sit here tonight to go back on my word. I am therefore requesting that Birchington is afforded the same village status in line with the surrounding Thanet villages, and I would like this confirmed to me within a written response. All members, parish councillors, district councillors and county councillors should be fiercely speaking out about Birchington village's status. Failure to do so and you will be complicit in our beautiful village turning into a town. And my final comment is that the local plan, a lot like the council's, not fit for purpose.
Thank you, Councillor Brim. Before we move on to Councillor Messenger, you have requested a recorded vote, so can I gauge the consensus of members with regards to a recorded vote? Are members in agreement with a recorded vote? In that case, we'll organise a recorded vote at the end. No, you've spoken, Councillor Brim. It's Councillor Messenger now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to remind members that the NPPF are guidelines and not statutory. Whilst I approve of the change suggested by overview and scrutiny and adopted by Cabinet today, I disapprove of the housing number that we are subjected to. And I want to reassure Westgate residents that I will do all that is within my power to fight the plan that we have inherited from UKIP.
Thank you, Councillor Messenger. I have Councillor Dixon and then Councillor Constantine. Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Bayford said at the council meeting just last week, a significant delay could result in further intervention by the Minister. The cost of any external work would have to be borne by the council. Even if there were no intervention, there would be significant costs to the council in reviewing and updating the evidence base. This could quite easily cost several tens of thousands of pounds. So why does this administration insist on going ahead with an unsound plan?
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Constantine.
Thank you. I'm also speaking on behalf of some of my residents. Obviously, this is a hot topic. But I believe we should have a local plan that's based on adequate, up-to-date and relevant evidence. Evidence about the economic, social and environmental prospects of Thanet. Evidence that in fact responds to the needs of residents. Let me repeat that. The needs of residents. Most of whom are truly fed up and confused by this situation. The evidence that we should be looking at should lead us to adopt a sound local plan. Sound local plan. It's our duty as councillors, our responsibility to ensure our strategies for housing are fit for purpose, that they are in fact sound. This plan is far from sound. We are, I believe, in effect, handing over control of our local plan to the DCHLG and James Brokenshire. And I have to say, it's inconceivable to me that he will aid an unsound plan. And what this does is it kicks the ball into the long grass. And those people here that need decent jobs, they can frankly whistle for those jobs for a while longer. And those people here that need decent homes can frankly whistle for decent homes because we're not in a position to build them. And I'm thinking particularly of those people that are rough sleepers, those people that are sofa surfers, and those 71 families that Leslie Game responded to my question last week. This is an outrageous decision by this council. It's not sound. We're going round and round in a muddle, and we need to sort this out. And I have to tell all of you, it is our responsibility as councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Constantine. I think next is Councillor Larkins and then Councillor Reverend Piper. And then Councillor Banbridge.
Good evening, councillors, Chair and public. New policies relating to green space, energy and water efficiency and internal space standards could not be applied in the event that we lose control of the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Larkins. Councillor Reverend Stuart Piper. And excuse me if I get you out of order, but I have got lots of names on the list, but I'll get round to you all in due course. Thank you. Councillor Piper.
Thank you, Chair. We are not planners. That is an obvious statement. But if I then take us back to January, we weren't planners then either. But 35 of us felt that what was being proposed in January also was unsound. I would refer members and officers to the many items of correspondence which were available to be read on the Council's website from Southern Water, who did not fully support the idea, the Environment Agency, the Highways Agency, the military, Dover District Council and Kent County Council, who announced they were, at that time, £39 million short of the bill required to meet the infrastructure process. So I'm one who does not believe that the decision we took in this place in January was wrong. I believe we took the right decision to try and do better. Leader, you mentioned that we are where we are. I'd like to add a little bit to that. We are where we are, and we are in a hole. And the first thing about when you're in a hole, stop digging. This council, elected members, and what we've been doing since 2011 has been digging a hole that is bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually we will not be able to get out of it, so the government will take over and they'll send us sort of a half-hearted attempt at a rope ladder or something, I'm sure, to get us out. We have to stop digging. We have to make a decision. I personally do not believe this is the best local plan we could have, but I also believe it's better than the one we were given in January for consideration. I further believe that it is time we put a marker in the sand. At the moment, we have no dog in the fight. We are not part of the process, really. We need to get something out for publication, for public comment. We need to get the inspector looking at what we're doing and the changes we've tried to make since that appalling effort in January. Finally, I too do not blame officers for the situation that we're in. Whether you like it or not, Leader, it is the leader who sets policy with his or her cabinet and officers implement it. We have been told that many times. Therefore, the situation we arrived at in January was not the fault of the officers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Piper. Well spoken. Councillor Banbridge.
Thank you, Chair. I want it noted that I believe the logic of basing an important part of your local plan covering aviation on an out-of-date, spurious, untested piece of work such as the Avey Report that clearly contradicts the recent NPPF and National Aviation Policy urging protection of airports and local plans defies belief, as does the questionable credibility of advice saying to retain an aviation policy is unlawful, especially in light of the recently submitted DCO. I just want to give everybody a little bit of history so that we know why we are where we are. In 2015, 48 TDC councillors were elected on a promise to support the airport. From August 2015, Councillor Wells backed out of his promise and led a determined effort to designate Manston for housing. This was bound to end in defeat, as it did on the 18th of January, because the majority of councillors were determined to keep their promise that they made to their voters. Councillor Wells had nearly 3 years in which to produce a local plan which met the wishes of the voters, and he failed. The inevitable result was the intervention from the Ministry and the unseemly pressure now being placed on this council. Councillor Wells deliberately flouting the wishes of the voters is directly responsible for why we are where we are today. However, we are where we are, and we must do what we must do in order to ensure the best case scenario for Manston Airport. In this case, option 2 is that best case scenario, and although I am deeply unhappy that we have been unable to reintroduce robust, genuine aviation policy SP05, incorporating EC4 into the draft due to officer advice, I have no choice than to vote for option 2 as the only option that gives some protection to the airport, and I sincerely hope my fellow councillors, with respect to their electorate, are of the mind to do the same.
Thank you, Councillor Banbridge. Councillor Wells, you have been named. Would you like to respond?
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Yes, I agree with the first instinct there. That is, you have officers who implement policy on behalf of councillors and leaders and cabinet. The problem we now have, quite simply and straightforwardly, is the policy that should be put forward by the leader and the cabinet doesn't exist because it can't be evidenced. So what is in its place is a series of words which carry no weight and no defence of the airport whatsoever. In defence of that position, many of the Conservative councillors say quite simply, don't worry about the extra housing numbers on greenfield sites because we can reverse that in the future as and when the DCO arrives. The Ministry has already specifically warned its council against putting too much reliance on the DCO, and actually that logic worked in reverse. If you are that certain you can reverse things in the future, what you could do would be to put the houses on Manston, reverse that in the future, and save 2,500 houses worth of greenfield site. And I'm sure the Countess of Westgate are going to take that into account.
Read your papers.
Thank you, Councillor Wells. Councillor Lynn Fairbrass.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Piper has just displayed the fact that he still doesn't understand the local plan process. That appalling offer from January is actually what we have now and some. An option was given before that vote that actually gave a 2-year window before policy SP05 kicked in, which would have protected the site. But this option deletes any relevant policy for the airport site, giving no protection whatsoever. Based on its own evidence, the Council cannot justify a no-policy stance. Advice from Council has constantly been that a site this size with no policy will render the plan unsound. I cannot and will not add my name to a proposal that will probably cost this Council tens of thousands of pounds.
Thank you. I have Councillor Crowe-Brown on my list next.
Thank you, Chair. I was one of those that stood on the Manston ticket. Indeed, I was based at RAF Manston on 2 occasions in the 80s and 90s. I saw how much the MOD used to have to pay for that site. Electricity bills, thousands per month. Now,
Bloke's paid.
yeah. I would say that I'm fortunate to be on the local plan working group, and I have the utmost admiration for the strategic working group, the planning group, the legal advice we had both internally and externally, and I for one will not waste public money, so I won't support this option 2. Indeed, allied to the loss of control of the plan, there is a significant risk to the provision of key infrastructure to support development, roads, schools, health facilities, etc. So why are we going to risk this with this unsound plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowe-Brown. Councillor Pugh.
Thank you, Chairman. It's amazing that the UKIP group are advocating for, well, coming out in support of trying to stop a no deal for once. It's quite interesting. And I'd like to refer to Councillor Wells to the fact of the charity ball that 11 of us councillors attended at the weekend. You know, happy to declare it if I need to. My dad's an estate agent. I'll happily declare that. I haven't been to Crampton recently, but I'll declare that if I need to. The main issue that I'd like to raise is that I'd like to reiterate what the councillors for Westgate have said. I disagree with the housing numbers, and I will do everything I can to dispute and to stop the amount of houses that are proposed for the villages. We don't need them, it's as simple as that, and the integrity of the villages needs to be saved. The integrity of the villages needs to be saved. It's as simple as that, and if we destroy Manston, we'll never get it back.
Thank you, members. Can I remind members to stick to the agenda? We've already discussed a certain pavilion event. Would you like to respond? You've been named again, Councillor Wells. Thank you. In that case, Councillor Hunter
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question for our leader, Councillor Bayford. You said with the loss of control over new development, there is a greater risk that development will take place on a more unplanned basis. So why is this administration putting forward a plan that is likely to be found unsound?
Well, I'd refute that the plan being put forward is unsound, but I think the point being made that without a current local plan, then we find it much more difficult to control development in places we don't want it.
Apologies, Hunter, my mouth is extremely dry. I've got Councillor Venables now.
Kind of agreeing with my colleague Councillor Messenger over here, who is going to oppose houses being built in Westgate. I live in Westgate. I'm wondering what councillors in this chamber will actually be advocating for those houses to be built in their own wards, when most people seem to be opposed to those houses being built. and we have an option for them being built elsewhere on a Belford site. I just wondered who is going to be saying, let's have them here.
Not needed.
Thank you, Councillor Venables. I've got Councillor Wells and then Councillor Johnson. Councillor Wells.
I thought you'd spoken already.
Okay, very, very simply and straightforwardly, because I think there's a risk that we could be here all evening if we're not careful. Councillor Campbell at scrutiny said something very straightforward and very simple that I think we need to take into account at this point. We had a long and esoteric debate on what the difference was between the terms illegal and unsound in local plan terms. There is no doubt that option 2 is not illegal, mainly because it doesn't actually say anything. The words that are in it have no policy base, they have no evidence base. It is a form of words and aspiration rather than anything that you can firmly base any real decision on. However, if that is so, and it is so, then what we are proposing is an unsound plan, and I doubt that we'll ever get to public examination. I suspect that Mr. Brokenshire and his team will be in and telling us what to do long before we get to that point. And that will be because there are too many councillors in this chamber who, like happened before with live animal exports, will not listen to professional advice and would rather listen to their own personal and private beliefs.
Thank you, Councillor Wills. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. In response to the final remark by Councillor Wells, it was actually the professional advice of officers here that led to the closure of the port, not the advice of elected members. I was here, I know what happened, so we'll move on from that one. It was an officer of this council who said he needed to close the port. He had a duty of care.
Councillor Johnson, can we move on to the local plan?
You allowed a lie to continue in this office.
Right. If we can move on, please.
So all you all want to talk about is the airport. This is a huge document. This document was ready in January 2015 and ready to be finished by September 2015 with final consultation. That January 2015, our Labour administration had a working party looking exclusively at the airport site. We left it as an airport in that next election, but some of us knew we had done our best, not just in the 4 years from the time we took control, or the 3 years. We had done it all our political lives in here to support, as had many at KCC of all political colours. Funding was allocated, etc. In 2010, there was a coalition government. The coalition government told us to hold fire on everything we were doing with planning because they had some new ideas for us. So you were Conservative Council, you were the leader, we had to hold fire. In 2011, we were told to hold fire well into 2012. It went on and on and on. The airport was eventually bought, as we all know, by Mrs. Globe for £1, and then she decided she wasn't going to operate an airport. We then had to look at something else. I phoned the aviation minister, Robert Goodyear, and he was very nice to me, but he said, such a shame, airports are closing all over the country. I went to see Anne Globe on the 3rd of July 2014. I spoke with everybody. I included all political leaders in every meeting that I had so that you knew what was going on. We did our best to save the airport. By the time we lost control of the council, as I say, we left it as an airport, but you didn't meet as a working group ever again since, which you should have done. I'm sorry, you must allow me to finish. I've kept quiet at every meeting about this for months. The truth is this, we did our best. You are now going to have more housing than you ever thought. We were crucified in meetings in Westgate and Birchington with a few houses we were told we had to have there. How are people going to feel with the extra you're now being told to put in? The infrastructure is a disaster in Thanet already. Doctor surgeries are closing. We could lose our stroke unit. We want to look at this document as a whole. You want to look at the pollution that can be brought in by having, I'm sorry, everybody, but a cargo airport. I used Manston for passenger. I fought tooth and nail for it. I contacted the family in Ireland who originally owned the land. I did everything possible to save that airport. But even I, with my passion, could not do it. This document must be approved. The dog's dinner that you've produced this evening to ask us to vote on is taking us back 5 years. Sorry, Leader. Sorry,
Have we nearly
Chairman.
finished? Thank you. Well, I think Councillor Rosecki, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick couple of words, having listened to the debate tonight. I see that Labour obviously want to build houses on the site, yet claim they want jobs. How are you going to get jobs out of that? I don't know, because I'm sure there'll be big companies that will be coming down from London and producing little caravan villages around the place and building housing if that was the case. My old outfit obviously didn't want the airport at its highest levels, otherwise we could have achieved that, no problem, when we had control of the council. Councillor Bayford had listened to what the independents have said and has adjusted some of the wordings to help us move along and get the airport. We do need the airport here in Thanet. It will bring the jobs that Thanet needs, and it's the best thing and the only thing that can be used on the Manston side. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Evans.
Yes, councillors, be sure that what you're voting on tonight is giving us the self-determination to carry on with this, what we do at the moment. If you vote against it, it will be taken out of our hands and then we'll have no say in it whatsoever. I know the houses are unpalatable, but it doesn't take a genius to work out that 30% of our population will be retired in 10 years. In 20 years, that 30% will be dying off. These houses will never be built. Be sure of that, okay? So what you're voting on tonight is a straight vote for keeping the local plan in our own hands, or washing our hands with it and letting the men from the ministry take over. It's as simple as that. Them houses will never be built because we've got an ageing population.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Councillor Jeremy Fairbrowns.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Councillor Bayford has said all the time there is no adopted local plan, there is a significant risk that the council cannot demonstrate a 5-year housing supply. If this occurs, the council would lose the ability to refuse housing applications in undesirable locations, or could face an increased risk of losing planning appeals and consequently greater risk of costs being granted against the cash-strapped council. So why is this administration proceeding with an unsound plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fairbrowns. We've had some passionate debate. Yes, Councillor.
I'd just like to remind members that yes, I was elected to save Manston Airport, but I was also elected to reduce housing figures in Westgate. If I was to survey the majority of residents in Westgate, they would all say that they would rather reduce housing figures as opposed to Manston Airport. Now, that's sad for me to admit because I want both, but I know that I can't have both. Now, I must represent my electorate, and I stood on a platform with Councillor Wells and we promised to reduce housing figures in Westgate. Now, I don't believe these calculations are viable. I feel we're using out-of-date data. I've seen data today from mid-2017 that suggests there's more deaths in Thanet than births. So I feel that the population is reducing, so I'm quite happy for the housing calculations to be redone and hopefully we get reduced housing numbers. So that's why I cannot support the draft local plan. Thank you.
Councillor Day.
I think one of the main things that brings us all to support Manston Airport when we do, and we need to think of more of it in national terms as well, is it's a strategic asset to this country. Since the first report was put out, we voted to leave Europe. We need the airport to be able to get our goods in and out of the world and be able to trade. I think that's more important than village numbers of housing because it's such a national strategic piece of infrastructure, and I'll do everything I can to support Manston Airport and give it the best chance of surviving in its current state, or in the new state we hope it to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Day. I think we've had quite a robust debate on a very emotive subject, so Leader, I'll hand it back to you, and then we can get on with the recorded vote. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just want to respond to a couple of points that were made. And I think one of the points to be made is that this administration has only been in power for 4 months. There were 6 years of other administrations prior to that. So I think that the fact that we've moved this to where it is today is something of an achievement. I also think it's quite interesting that, outside, people are always saying, well, the council's run by officers, members just do as they're told. But here tonight, quite clearly, everybody's saying that, the officers knew what they were doing, it's the members that were wrong, the members. But I think what in fact happened, and I'd like to thank the officers for this, I'm very conscious that option 1 was their preferred option, but they did recognise that members had an opportunity to take part in the shaping of the local plan, and this administration wished to shape it a slightly different way, and I thank them for the support they've given us in doing that. It's interesting as well that, I've been around for 4 months. After 2 weeks of being leader of this council, I've received a letter of congratulations from Sajid Javid. I also told we were into intervention at that point in time. So, the intervention was the responsibility of someone else, but here we are. And when the men from the ministry came in, they made it abundantly clear that their primary objective was to ensure that the local plan was produced in a timely fashion. And I think we've responded to that admirably. Councillor Constantine talks about things in rough sleepers and so on. I'd just like to remind her that the government has granted this council £367,000 to address that problem, and I'd refer her to my leaders' report of the last council, where I actually outlined the success of the winter shelter. So I think we're doing very well in combating that particular problem. Of course, people have got different views to us about this. I would urge them to take advantage of the opportunity to go along, put comments in the comment stage, in the publication stage, and to go along to the public inquiry and make their points known, because that's where this plan will finally take shape. I can't let Councillor Fairbrass get away with the suggestion that we had an option on the table in council. It wasn't in council. No, you're giving the impression that council rejected.
Let the leader speak, please. Thank you.
Councillor Fairbrass is giving the impression that this council refused some kind of ameliorated option round option 1, and that wasn't the case. It just wasn't true. So, in fact, option 1 was where you were, option 2 is where we are now. And what I've got to say in conclusion is that most members here tonight were elected on a pledge to do what they could to bring aviation back to Manston. Voting for tonight's recommendation gives us the chance to honour that pledge. Members, let's do the right thing. Thank you.
No, councillor was summing up, I'm told. So we move straight on to the recorded vote. So I'll ask the monitoring officer to do a recorded vote. Thank you. In that case, Councillor Fairbrass.
Thank you. Councillor Bayford, you're very well aware that there was a second option that was circulated, and it was in the public domain, that there was a policy set for SPO5 which was able to be deferred for 2 years. It was sent round to every group in this council, and none of the groups, apart from the Labour group, would support that. So there was no point in putting that to the council on the night of the vote. So I'd like you to retract that it's not true, please.
Maybe maybe my mishearing goes back to the cabinet meeting this afternoon, because it was pointed out to me by somebody else that the suggestion had been made. If you weren't making that suggestion, then I'm not calling you a liar.
Thank you. Can we now move on to a recorded vote? I'll ask the monitoring officer to read out your names. Thank you.
Let's read out what they're actually voting for.
The proposal is with regards to the notes that you found on your chair this evening, and as read out by the leader at the beginning of the debate. And that's from 1 through to 6. So that's what we're voting on. Monitoring officer.
Thank you. If I can carry out the recorded vote. Councillor Ashby. Agree. Councillor Bainbridge. Agree. Councillor Bayford.
Agree.
Councillor Braidwood.
Against.
Councillor Brim.
Against.
Councillor Buckley.
Agree.
Councillor Campbell.
Against.
Councillor Glenn Coleman Cook.
Against.
Councillor Keith Coleman Cook.
Agree.
Councillor Connor.
Against.
Councillor Constantine.
Against.
Councillor Crowe-Brown.
Against.
Councillor Curran.
Agree.
Councillor Dawson.
Agree.
Councillor Day.
Agree.
Councillor Della. Councillor Dennis.
Agree.
Councillor Dexter.
Agree.
Councillor Dixon.
Against.
Councillor Edwards.
Agree.
Councillor Evans.
Agree.
Councillor Jeremy Fairbrass.
Against.
Councillor Lynn Fairbrass. Councillor Falcon.
Against.
Councillor Game.
Agree.
Councillor Gregory.
Agree.
Councillor Grove.
Against.
Councillor Hayton.
Agree.
Councillor Hillman.
Against.
Councillor J. Jones.
Agree.
Councillor Johnston.
Against.
Councillor Larkins.
Against.
Councillor Martin.
Agree.
Councillor Matterface.
Against.
Councillor Messenger.
Agree.
Councillor Parsons.
Agree.
Councillor Linda Piper.
Agree.
Councillor Reverend Stuart Piper.
Agree.
Councillor Pugh.
Agree.
Councillor Rogers. Councillor Rozecki.
Agree.
Councillor David Saunders.
Agree.
Councillor Maeve Saunders. Councillor Savage.
Agree.
Councillor Shonk.
Agree.
Councillor Thomas Merching.
Against.
Councillor Taylor.
Agree.
Councillor Taylor Smith.
Agree.
Councillor Tomlinson.
Agree.
Councillor Townend. Councillor Venables.
Against.
Councillor Wells.
Against.
Thank you.
That's 31 versus 21. Proposal is agreed. Thank you. And that now concludes the business for the meeting of the Council this evening. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you.